Thank you for joining us for Yarmouth Historical Society's lecture series. My name is Katie Worthing, and I'm very pleased to welcome Bob Greene to our series today. Bob is a Portland native, a journalist, and a historian. He has done extensive research into his own genealogy and discovered that he is at least the 8th generation of his family to be born in Cumberland County. He has taught at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at USM and served on the board of Maine Historical Society. Thanks so much, Bob. Welcome.
Thank you. I recently had dinner with several friends, and I just happened to mention I was working on this talk. And my friend asked, "What is the title of your speech?" M&M, I said, to which she responded, "You're going to talk about candy?" When I said no, her husband, who's a sports fan, said, "Oh, I know. Since you used to be a sports writer, I guess you're talking about Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris." New York Yankee fans will know he was referring to the two outfielders known as the M&M boys. I was laughing when I said, "No, I'm going to be talking about states." "Aha," my friend said, "the Missouri Compromise, Maine and Missouri becoming states 200 years ago." "Nope," I said, "I'm going to be talking about Maine and Mississippi." Needless to say, my friends were completely befuddled, and I might add, so might I. But let me begin and see where this leads us. We all have heard how Maine is one of the whitest states in the nation. I'll start by reading from Roach Snack's website, which, by the way, counts Hispanic whites as being, are you ready for this? White. Quote, "Did you know that in 1950, 90% of America was white? Now, white people make up about 2/3 of all races in the US, and by 2050, that number will be at less than half. So that begs the question, which states are hanging on to their whiteness? You could probably make a pretty good guess. It's the places where white people are still doing what white people do. Stuff white people like includes yoga, marathons, and apparently Maine. That's at least according to the most recent American Community Survey that pegs Maine as the whitest in the country. And how white is Maine exactly? Well, American Community Survey says that Maine currently is 93.6% white. For reference, America as a whole is about 61.3% white. So Maine is 50% more white than America as a whole, end quote. Whoops. Don't forget Mississippi. You might wonder why on earth would I compare Maine with Mississippi? After all, the Census Bureau reports that the state of Mississippi in 2012 was 57.5% white. But I'm not really comparing the two states at all. You see, at one period of time, Mississippi had a law that stated that if you had one drop of black blood, you were black. One drop. Think about that. One drop. Like many others, I've done my DNA test. To nobody's surprise, the bulk of my ancestry is in Africa. But a portion of my ancestry is from Northern Ireland and Scotland. Now, no matter how much of my blood comes from the British Isles, there's no way I'm going to be mistaken for an Irishman or a Scot. But one drop of black blood in the old laws of Mississippi was all it took to make you black, no matter how you appeared to others. So it's easy to understand why colored folks passed for white when they could. After all, there were laws against blacks, even in Maine, that said who they could marry or where they could go to school. And while there may not have been laws against it, the color of your skin went a long way to determine where you could live, what kind of job you could get, and whether you could get a loan from a bank. One drop. Strangely enough, the one drop rule was enacted into law was not, excuse me, the one-drop rule was not enacted into law until 1910, decades after the Civil War, emancipation, and the Reconstruction era. So who exactly is considered colored in the United States? Leave it to comedian Red Fox to explain. Those my age remember Red Fox for his party records with the dirty jokes. Younger folks remember him for his television series, Sanford and Son. In one of his stand-up routines, Red Fox was right on the mark when he said, quote, "White folks come in one shade, white. Black folks, on the other hand, come in chocolate, black walnut, burnt almond, chocolate mocha, pecan, vanilla, yellow, mellow, light, bright, and damn near white." It's those latter colors that apparently threw off the census takers. Plus the fact that if being black is a problem in this society, then you could easily get rid of that problem if you're light enough to pass for white. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that everyone who is light enough is, quote, passing. I would say 99.9% of people don't really know their family history well enough to bring into consideration that old Mississippi rule. So let's take a look at Maine. Despite laws against interracial marriage, there was a lot of that going on in Maine. Edward Oney was black. His wife, Laura Cleveland, was white. Both were from Thomaston, and their fourth child was labeled as expected. By the way, although his birth says the one-half white Everett is the fourth child of Edward and Laura, I have not been able to find any records of the first three, births or deaths. It is interesting, at least to me, to see how quickly families can change. As you can see by this record, when Almeda Isabel Freeman was born in Yarmouth, she and her parents, William H. Freeman, were all listed as black. That was in 1902. And this is William H. Freeman, Almeda's father. 8 years later, the 1910 United States Federal Census reported the entire family was white. And we all know the United States government never makes a mistake. When Fred Odell Carter of Yarmouth registered for the World War I draft, he listed himself as being a Negro, married with 3 children. And sure enough, the 1920 federal census shows Fred and his family are mulatto, while his wife, Beatrice, is listed as white. 10 years later, the census taker made a different determination, and as you can plainly see, Maine became a little bit whiter. Please understand, I'm not knocking it or trying to be critical. As baseball manager Casey Stengel used to say, quote, "It's in the book." You, on the other hand, can look at the family. Take Elsie Carter, for example. Here she is, and she's identified in the 1930 census as white, even though her father, Fred Odell Carter, was listed on her birth certificate as mulatto. When her sister, Mary Rose Carter, was born in Yarmouth, she was identified as a quadroon, 1/4 black. Hey, you can't make this stuff up. I had trouble finding any further record of her until I realized she had changed her name from Mary Rose to Rose Mary Carter. That's what she called herself when she got married in Portsmouth to Thomas Norman Brown Jr. And note, she is now listed as white. The matriarch of the Jacklin family, Lucy Ruby Jacklin, won several awards for her graceful moves on the dance floor when she was in her youth. Thanks to great record keeping, we know that Lucy Ruby Jacqueline is identified as an octoroon. That's rare in Maine, although it wasn't that unusual in Louisiana. Lucy's birth record identifying her as being octoroon is what or who you get if both parents are quadroons. As I said earlier, you can't make this stuff up, but apparently somebody did. And it's not just Yarmouth families. These are the children of Gustavus Manuel of Brunswick and his wife, Isabella Pinkham. The sister of Gustavus, Theodosia Manuel, was my great-great-grandmother. So these children are my first cousins, 3 times removed, if you're into genealogy. On the left is Annie, the oldest. Annie married Henry Harrison Call of Bodenham, and they had a son, Henry Anthony Call. Here's Henry Anthony Call with his second wife, Luella Lysett of North Amity, up in Aroostook County. Henry and his first wife, Rose Fournier of Thompson, had 4 children. The oldest, Ralph, is listed as white. Then comes Isabella, who was first listed as black, then that was crossed out and white written in. Note that both parents, Henry and Rose, are called white. The third child, Irene, is white, but the baby, Anne Margaret, was listed as black, as was her father, Henry. While there may have been some questions about Isabella, there are no questions about her children. And no questions about other descendants of Henry and Rose Call. Frank Scott was a Maine guide who lived in Machias. When he died there in 1913 at the age of 58, he was listed as being white. That's a big difference from the 1860 federal census of Machias, when Frank, then 5 years old, and his 2 younger brothers were listed as mulatto, as was their 25-year-old fisherman father, Henry Scott. John Darling of Harpswell died in 1918. At the time, someone took time to correctly identify his racial makeup, mixed, white and black. Henry Taylor was born in Virginia. A black man, Henry first shows up in Maine in the 1870 federal census of Bodenham, where he's living with a white couple. 4 years later, Henry is teaching school at the Litchfield Academy when he marries a Litchfield girl, Marietta Goodwin. Marietta is a descendant of 4 passengers on the Mayflower. As you can see, Henry is listed as black in the 1900 census, while his wife, son, and daughter are all called white. There's no Mississippi rule for Carlton and Amy. The 1910 census of Gorham shows Archibald Johnson as black, his wife Jessie is white, and their 4 children, Adelaide, Arthur, Richard, and Norman, are mulatto. Or are they? These are Richard's children, which means Teresa, Joseph, and Michael are the grandchildren of Archibald, who was listed as of 1910 as black. By 1930, Archibald Johnson has died and his wife Jessie has remarried. Living with the couple are the last 3 of Jessie and Archibald's children, Norman, Harold, and Lillian. As you can see, they're all identified as bleeding white. Patrick is Norman's son and another grandson of Archibald. By the way, the Johnston family lived next door to me when I was a child during World War II. Patrick, who now lives in Arizona, came to Maine searching for his family roots shortly after I returned home in 2002. It was Patrick who told me that when the family moved back to Boston in the mid-1940s, they no longer considered themselves to be Negroes and became known as white. A friend of mine, Douglas Hall of Durham, once told me you can go from black to white in 3 generations. Here's my first cousin, Ozzie Ricks, who lives in Buxton. This is his son, John. John's son is Brennan. So, is Maine as white as the figures show? I'll let you decide as I show you pictures of some of my relatives, some admittedly distant relatives, who just might cause that old Mississippi one-drop law to explode in a convulsive fit. Just remember that Mississippi rule, one drop.
Right. Thank you so much, Bob. Really appreciate your time and your research.
My pleasure. And anytime, I'd be more than happy.
Great. Thank you.